Okay, in this short video, I'm going to teach you how to paint better trees by helping you rethink how you look at trees. All right, welcome to Paint Coach. My name is Chris Fornatero, and I'm here to help simplify oil painting so that you can get better faster. So I've had a lot of students that struggle with painting like big masses of trees. They look at their photo and they see just this mess of leaves and all this stuff, and they can't really make much out of it. So that's more specifically of what I'm going to be talking about today. Painting a big collection or mass of trees in a landscape. Now, before we go further, I know that the way I paint, especially my landscapes, is more of a looser style. There's definitely people out there that paint more detailed than I do. And even if that's what you're looking to do, I really think thinking about trees this way is going to help you. Because what I'm talking about here, it's not about technique or style. It's about the fundamentals. It's understanding form, value, simplification. And no matter how you want to paint, getting a better grasp on those fundamentals is going to help you do more of whatever it is you want to do. Now, as far as color mixing goes, I'm not going to go over color mixing in this video. If you struggle with color mixing, I actually offer the color mixing video from my Foundations of Oil Painting course for free. If you want to check that out, there's a link to it in the description below. So to help teach this subject, I'm going to be using a painting that I did for a Patreon tutorial as an example. Now, I also did another version of this painting trying to incorporate all of the pitfalls I see people make when painting trees. Now, in the past, you probably had paintings where your trees kind of look like this. I know I sure do. But the first thing I want to point out here is the lack of form with these trees. There's no real light source like there is in the other example. I can't tell where the sun is coming from, which direction it's hitting the trees. There's no real volume to the trees. They just kind of look like a flat cardboard cutout. A lot of times when you're just kind of like trying to wing it and you don't really know how to fix something, you just keep piling on more paint and you think, oh, maybe more colors and more paint is the answer. And if I keep adding more, it'll turn out good. I feel like this happens a lot with trees because you just think like, the more leaves, the better. Maybe if I just add some more leaves, maybe these really, bright red, orange, yellow leaves, like once I put these in with a really tiny brush, that's just gonna make it all come together. But then you just end up with just a ton of paint on your canvas that really isn't reading as anything. All right, so let's get you to rethink trees. Right now, you're probably thinking of them as tree trunks with branches and then a whole bunch of leaves on those branches. I want you to forget about that for right now and to think of all these trees as just one big mass, like just big mounds of clay. When you think of it this way, it's gonna be a lot easier to see and portray the form with a light side and a shadowed side, which is the first thing you gotta think about when painting trees. After you figure out that form and identify it, then there are things that you can do to make them read and look like trees. You can cut back into these big mounds with negative space. A lot of times it's gonna be the sky or maybe, a mountain or whatever's behind this big group of trees, but just cutting back in and making little holes and changing the overall shape is gonna help. You can also add slightly smaller and lighter shapes to identify clusters of leaves in these trees. And even in certain spots, you can get really small with your shapes and even indicate individual leaves. And also softening a lot of edges around these leaves is really gonna help them read as trees. Also, thinking about trees this way is gonna help you overcome the lack of information or sometimes the abundance of information that are in photos. I first painted this painting in plein air and used that study to paint the painting for the Patreon tutorial, but here is a photo of the scene when I was painting it. But when you look at the trees in this photo, it's very overwhelming. It's just a mess of colors and leaves and just chaos, and it's really hard to identify any kind of form. Like, it's hard to see which is the light side, which is the shadowed side. But if you're working strictly just from a photo, what you can do is use other elements in the scene as clues, like this barn. The front here is definitely in shadow and the side is in light, so that's giving you an indicator of where the sun is coming from. So when you start constructing your trees, you know where to put the light side and where to put the shadowed side. Also, you don't want to be limited by your photo reference. It's a reference. You don't have to copy it exactly. And honestly, most of the time with landscapes in particular, you're going to have to do more with the photo. You're gonna have to kind of pull more out of it. You're not trying to copy the photo exactly. You're trying to create the best painting that you can, but using the photo as a reference. Things still have to make sense. But for example, this photo just does not capture the vividness of these trees. The oranges and yellows and reds of the leaves were just so strong, especially compared to a lot of the cooler colors in the scene. Like the grass was a much cooler green, especially early in the morning when there was a layer of frost over it. And the thing that drew me to the scene was just how colorful and vibrant these trees were. So when I got back to the studio and painted it again, I enhanced that. Also, when you look at the photo, there's a lot of transparent parts of these trees. Like you can see through a lot more of them. They don't seem as dense in certain areas. And trying to go through and identify all that and identify and single out every individual tree in this forest and being like, well, where does this tree start and stop and where does this one start and stop? Personally, that would just drive me nuts. And I know that the most important thing is just thinking about all these trees as a whole in big masses. All right, now it's time to paint the painting and put into action everything I was talking about. The first thing I do is I block out all these trees with a dark flat color of thin paint. I keep the paint thin with paint thinner so I can build on top of it. This is what I do with all the other elements of the scene. I block out the scene with big shapes of flat color. If you want more information on this process of starting a painting with big shapes of flat color, I've made a whole video on that. I'll put a link to that above right now. And then I move to slightly lighter and smaller shapes. And the main things I'm thinking about here are form and randomness, which sounds contradictory, but I'm thinking about which way the light is coming and which sides of these trees is going to be getting light. But also while I'm creating these shapes, I'm trying to be conscious not to be too uniformed about it. For some reason, we naturally just make things the same shape and the same size and the same distance apart. So I'm trying to be aware of that and portray the form with the light and shadowed side, but also keep things random. I'm also being very loose and letting all this wet paint blend together in certain areas to create soft edges and transitions. Also, when painting trees, think about depth. And a lot of times the deeper into the trees you can see, the darker it gets. That's what I did with this blue here. I kind of pushed it a little cooler and a little bluer to contrast with blue's complement orange that I knew was going to be coming later on. So I picked certain areas in these trees where I would want to see further back and just to give it a little more depth. I continue with the same process of building smaller and lighter shapes while being careful not to go too light. That's a mistake I used to make a lot. I would always think I needed to make the light values in my trees a lot lighter than I really needed. Then I indicate some branches. I don't want to overdo it. And then when I go back in to reestablish the sky, I use the sky to create some sky holes and also soften some edges. The next thing I do is I use my knowledge of atmospheric perspective and knowing as things get further away from you, they're gonna get cooler. So I work in a cooler color into these trees to kind of push them a little further. And also I simplify them. I kind of take out some of the smaller shapes and just simplify the whole mass more. And when I simplify it like that, that is also going to help push it and set it more in the distance. If you want more information on atmospheric perspective, I've made a whole video on that. I'll put a link to where you can watch that above right now. Then I pepper in some lighter, smaller shapes, soften a few more edges, and that is it. All right, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.